Today we're diving into a challenging topic. What is jihad? Few religious terms generate as much confusion as jihad. In modern discourse, it is often explained as an internal spiritual struggle. At the same time, it continues to be invoked in acts of violence around the world. These two realities cannot be separated from history. To understand jihad, we must examine how it is defined in Islamic sources and how it has been practiced. To understand jihad, it is not enough to quote isolated verses. The Qur'an must be read chronologically and through the lens of classical Islamic commentary. One of the most influential commentators is Ibn Kathir, whose tafsir remains authoritative in Sunni Islam. One of the most frequently cited verses on jihad is Qur'an 9:29. Fight those who do not believe in Allah and the last day, nor comply with what Allah and His Messenger have forbidden, nor embrace the religion of truth from among those who were given the scripture until they pay the tax, willingly submitting, fully humbled. Surah 9, known as At-Tawbah, is among the last chapters revealed. It belongs to the late Medinan period, when Muhammad and the Muslim community had military and political power. This passage is revealed in the context of conflict with Byzantine-aligned Christians and surrounding tribes. In his commentary, Ibn Kathir explains that this verse establishes fighting Jews and Christians until they submit to Islamic authority by paying the jizya. He emphasizes that this is a form of military jihad, not a spiritual metaphor. The verse allows people of the book to retain their religion, but only under Islamic governance and political subordination. Later in the same chapter, Qur'an 9:111 states, Allah has indeed purchased from the believers their lives and wealth in exchange for paradise. They fight in the cause of Allah and kill or are killed. This verse is revealed when jihad as armed struggle is already established as a communal obligation. Ibn Kathir interprets this verse literally. He presents it as a binding promise from Allah. Those who fight in His cause, risking their lives, are promised paradise if they are killed. The verse is applied directly to physical combat and martyrdom in battle. Quran 2:190 is often cited to argue that jihad is purely defensive. Fight in the cause of Allah only against those who wage war against you, but do not exceed the limits. Allah does not like transgressors. Kill them wherever you come upon them, and drive them out of the places from which they have driven you out. For persecution is far worse than killing, and do not fight them at the sacred mosque unless they attack you there. If they do so, then fight them. That is the reward of the disbelievers. But if they cease, then surely Allah is all forgiving, most merciful. Fight against them if they persecute you until there is no more persecution, and your devotion will be to Allah alone. If they stop persecuting you, let there be no hostility except against the aggressors. These verses come from an earlier Medinan stage, when the Muslim community was still consolidating itself. Ibn Kathir explains that these verses describe an early phase of fighting, with certain limitations. He does not treat them as the final word on jihad. Instead, he understands later revelations, especially Surah 9, as expanding and clarifying the scope of jihad beyond these initial constraints. Another key passage is Qur'an 8:39. Fight against them until there is no more persecution, and your devotion will be entirely to Allah. But if they desist, then surely Allah is all-seeing of what they do. This verse appears in a Medinan chapter revealed immediately after the Battle of Badr in 624 BC. This was Islam's first major military victory and marks the transition from persecution to armed conflict and expansion. The chapter as a whole deals with warfare, spoils of war, prisoners, and continued fighting against the Quraysh. This verse is therefore revealed in an active military context, not as a general moral or spiritual statement. In his commentary, Ibn Kathir explains that the command to fight in this verse refers to physical jihad. He interprets fight them until there is no more fitna, meaning idolatry and resistance to Islam, and religion is entirely for Allah. According to Ibn Kathir, fighting continues until opposition to Islam is removed, and the religion of Allah is established alone, without shirk, the sin of associating partners with Allah. Ibn Kathir does not interpret this verse as inner spiritual struggle. He places it within the framework of organized communal warfare. Later jihad verses, particularly in Surah 9, are understood by classical commentators as clarifying and expanding this command. When modern speakers say jihad only means inner struggle, they are not quoting Ibn Kathir. They are not quoting the classical consensus. They are prioritizing one meaning while downplaying the dominant historical one. When these verses are read together, a clear pattern emerges. Surah 2 introduces fighting in a limited early context. Surah 8 defines its objective, removing fitna so that religion belongs to Allah alone. Surah 9 formalizes the framework, fighting until submission, taxation, or death, and frames participation as a binding promise of paradise. This is not a collection of isolated statements, it is a progression. Classical commentators like Ibn Kathir did not treat these verses as symbolic or temporary. They understood them as establishing a lasting model for jihad, one that includes organized physical warfare under specific conditions. That framework shaped Islamic expansion for centuries, and it has not vanished. When modern jihadist movements justify violence, they are not inventing new theology. They are quoting these same verses, following this same trajectory, and appealing to the same classical authorities. Groups like ISIS, Al-Qaeda, Boko Haram, Hamas, and others consistently frame their violence as obedience to the same objective, removing opposition so that religion belongs to Allah alone. They are following what their God tells them to do. This is why redefining jihad as purely inner struggle does not resolve the problem. It does not account for the texts, the history, or the present reality. When modern speakers say jihad only means inner struggle, they are not quoting Ibn Kathir. They are not quoting the classical consensus. They are prioritizing one meaning while downplaying the dominant historical one. For Christians, this matters because the difference is not merely academic. Christianity does not possess a comparable mandate to remove opposition through force. Jesus rejected that path explicitly. Jesus said, "My kingdom is not of this world. If it were, my servants would fight to prevent my arrest by the Jewish leaders. But now my kingdom is from another place." In John 18:36. Christian witness spread through proclamation and suffering, not the elimination of rival belief. Understanding these Qur'an verses in their historical and exegetical context does not demonize Muslims. It explains why violence justified in the name of jihad continues to appear, and why it cannot be dismissed as a distortion without confronting the sources. Real peace requires honesty, and honesty begins with what the texts actually say. If you're ready to learn, grow, and speak truth in love, join us, subscribe now. The conversation starts here.